going on this and let you and I talk offline? I think the answer to that is yes.
Copy.
All right, gentlemen, we're live on Facebook. Just to let you know, I'm going to forego introductions. I'll let everybody have a couple minutes at the end. We have a hard stop today at 9:45 for a couple of reasons. So with that, I'm just going to dive right in. I'm coming to you from Houston today. So glad to see everybody. We're ending week 5 of the legislative session. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Transu, our lobbyist, and let's go.
Well, thank you, James. For everybody who doesn't know, happy 34th day of the legislative session of a 105-day session. And I'm going to, because of the hard stop, I'm just going to cruise through the bills that are on the agenda. And then if I have time at the end, I'll walk through some of the other bills that are being heard in the legislature this coming week. This coming Friday is original policy committee cutoff. And by that, I mean any policy bill that is in a House or a Senate committee in a policy committee has to be moved out by Friday. The big caveat on that, as I've mentioned before, is bills that are necessary to implement the budget. So Friday is a big culling of the bills that are introduced. So I'm going to start with House Bill 1025, a bill that this session everybody knows that we oppose. That bill passed out the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee yesterday and is probably moving on to the Appropriations Committee because it does have some fiscal impacts. As everybody knows, I think, that's a bill that we've signed up in opposition to and provided some written testimony in opposition to as well. The next bill I have for us is House Bill 1445, and that is the Patterns and Practices Bill, for lack of a better way to put it. There was a public hearing a few weeks ago where we testified in favor of that legislation. And just at a high level, that's a piece of legislation that, from a law enforcement standpoint, we were the only group to support it. But what I would do is encourage folks to go read the bill and see what's in there. And if there are ways you think we can make it better, let's have those conversations. That bill also got referred to the Appropriations Committee. It has a public hearing next week on the 16th. And again, it passed the Civil Rights and Judiciary with one small amendment by Representative Hansen, the prime sponsor, which took some language that was a little bit non-descriptive and then inserted the state constitution and a particular RCW. Pursuit bills and pursuit working group bills. Several of them are moving, and I'll just walk through those for a second, and one is not moving. So this House version of that bill is House Bill 1363, and that's the vehicular pursuit law that's out there that is sponsored by Representative Rule and Representative Robertson. That piece of legislation is scheduled for executive session this coming week on the 16th. As I mentioned before on this call, I think that the chair and the committee are going to probably find some sort of a middle ground in terms of going all the way back to reasonable suspicion or probable cause versus reasonable suspicion. Not quite certain what the chair is going to do and what that middle ground is going to be. He's got to worry about how many votes he can or cannot get in his caucus to move something out. I expect the Republicans will all be in favor of the bill as originally introduced, and the challenge or the question for Chair Goodman is what he can do to move a bill out of committee. On the Pursuit Working Group bill, and that on the House side is House Bill 1586. And remember, this is the bill that establishes a vehicle pursuit working group at the CJTC and then also creates a grant program for technology with regard to vehicular pursuits to include things like drones, GPS trackers, and automatic license plate readers for local governments. That also is scheduled for executive session next week on the 16th. So Chair Goodman, I think, is taking that day, and I think that's his last hearing day next week. So again, as I mentioned on the top end, things got to move out of the policy committee by next Friday. So sometimes in the legislature, when, my words, things aren't quite ready, you'll hear and you'll see committees move things along as a work in progress. So that may be the case on both of these for sure. The study bill, like I mentioned on the House side, is moving forward, and on the Senate side, it's Senate Bill 5533. Again, both of those bills are bills that we supported, and 5533 is scheduled for a public hearing in the Ways and Means Committee next week on the 14th. And again, those working group bills are the bills that we support and will testify in Ways and Means on the 14th. Next couple of bills that I wanted to touch on is there are two bills out there, House and the Senate, 5463 and 1607. And those are bills that are out to address some shortcomings in the juvenile interview area and providing for some exceptions to the strict rule of requiring a juvenile to get counsel before he or she can be talked to. And those are two bills that we support and have one amendment to make them a little bit better from our perspective and get some parental consent up in the process so that it isn't down in the process where somebody has been given the right to counsel and it's a parental exception so that a parent could say it was okay for a child to provide some information to a peace officer. Neither of those bills are scheduled. It's not looking too good for either of those two bills. I don't see them scheduled for next week. So I think those bills are ones that we're probably going to have to wait till next session to see if we can get some traction on them. So couple other bills, two bills in the tax area. So there are two bills out there, one in the House and one in the Senate, 5361 and 1446. And these are bills that we support that authorize local governments to impose a 0.1% sales tax for law enforcement purposes, and specifically for increasing the number of peace officers that a jurisdiction can hire. So again, I think that's a piece of legislation that is largely supported. Cities and counties like the discretion to do things like that, so it's not a mandate. So those 5361 is was passed out of the policy committee and has yet to be scheduled for a public hearing. It looks like 1446, although likely eligible to be necessary to implement the budget, isn't scheduled yet. So I think, as I've talked a little bit about on these before, sometimes the House and the Senate divvy up work. So in some instances, the prime sponsors of companion bills will agree that, this time your bill is going to be the vehicle and my bill is going to, sit off to the side. So again, that's a little bit of a division of work between the House and the Senate. So in this case, it looks like 5361 is the vehicle. Blake Fix and Blake Day. So you all probably know that the Senate Law and Justice Committee had a Blake hearing day earlier this week. And that was a hearing where Senator Dingra heard 4 bills. One bill to make it a felony for possession of drugs, one bill to decriminalize the possession of drugs. And remember, that came out of the Substance Use Recovery Committee, or SURSAC committee. And then there were two bills that were kind of more middle of the road, one sponsored by Senator Robinson and one sponsored by Senator Jesse Solomon. We testified as being supportive of both of the bills in the middle, the Solomon bill and the Robinson bill, with an emphasis on the Robinson bill because it had more in front diversion from the criminal justice system, whereas the Solomon bill required a conviction and the hammer of 45 days in jail. And we just felt that that was going to have a larger and bigger impact on the court system. So we leaned into the Robinson bill as the preferred alternative. That bill was passed out of committee 2 days ago on the 9th. And the bill that passed out was the SURSAC bill with some modifications in terms of adding things like requiring cities and counties to allow for the siting of behavioral health facilities, sort of making them essential public facilities under the Growth Management Act, and some other things. What I would tell you is that bill moved out of committee as that proverbial work in progress. While I think there may have been the votes to move it out of committee, I view this bill as a work in process because I don't know that a decriminalization bill has the votes on the Senate floor to move across the rotunda. So that bill now will move on to the Ways and Means Committee where it'll be further negotiated and then move along if it passes by the cutoff date for the Ways and Means Committee for things to move out. And that's coming up on the 24th of February, on the 47th day.
So isn't there a companion bill to that one in the House that's still moving?
Yeah, I don't think it is moving, James. I think between Goodman and I'll double check. I think between Goodman and Dinger, they've decided that the Senate is going to be the vehicle for the Blake fix. Next bills for me, or next bill for me is Senate Bill 5299. And that's a piece of legislation that we support that protects law enforcement officers who are targeted when they are off duty and provides a cause of action. That bill has moved forward out of the Senate Law and Justice Committee and is midweek this week. It moved to the second reading calendar in the Senate. So now that bill becomes eligible for what's called second reading. So eligible to be taken up by the full body of the floor. And again, this enhances the sentencing for assaulting an officer with a firearm and including a deadly weapon. So something we definitely support and something we hope continues to move forward. Traffic stops. House Bill 1513 and Senate Bill 5572. And this is the bill with regard to non-moving violations and makes them so that they cannot be a primary offense. 1513 moved out of the Community Safety and Justice and Reentry Committee last Thursday. And it was a due pass out of committee party lines to the House Transportation Committee. That's a piece of legislation that we are, I think, leaning real hard towards the oppose side. I think folks are trying to come up with a fix to it, and I think it'll be interesting to see what the Transportation Committee does with that piece of legislation. I know that on the Transportation Committee, there are 3 or 4, moderate Democrats on that committee, so it might be that bill takes a pretty significant stop in the Transportation Committee. And we've been asked by Representative Hackney to work with him and other groups to see if there's some sort of a middle of the road piece of legislation or amendments that might make the bill a little bit better, for lack of a better way of putting it. The Senate version, Senate Bill 5572, has a public hearing next week in the Senate Transportation Committee. And so both House Transportation Committees will have the bills. And again, this may be a case where one body or the other decides that they're going to be the vehicle for addressing the non-moving violations bills this session. House Bill 1428, which is a bill that basically, you know, my words, kind of allows for jaywalking in the state. That's probably not, you know, the best of descriptions of it, but it's a piece of legislation that, you know, certainly from our perspective is something that we have. And I think, James, correct me if I don't get this right, but in our Tuesday calls, we talked about jaywalking, and I think it, you know, basically came up that folks haven't issued a jaywalking ticket and don't remember the last time when they did. So again, this is a bill that allows a pedestrian to cross a roadway at any point, unless a reasonably careful person would realize there's an imminent threat. So cities and counties have taken a position in opposition as they think it might increase their liability because it does contain some instances, some language where even if you are facing a flashing "do not walk" across the street, that again, that reasonably careful person standard would apply. And so I think they're looking at it as a little bit of a liability. There was a public hearing in the House Transportation Committee on that bill, and you know, that's a piece of legislation that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, James, you know, I think we've decided that that's one we're just going to kind of stay out of and going to let the legislature decide what they're going to decide, given our discussions on our Tuesday meeting.
Yeah, that's correct. A lot of you on this call today were on the Tuesday morning meeting. The consensus was that this should not be a top priority. However, we would like some clarifying language to make sure everybody knows that jaywalking is still a crime if the elements are met, but it should be or not a crime, but it should be an offense, and it should be a civil infraction. I think that was our recommendations to the good Representative Hagney and the consensus of the group on Tuesday.
All right, the last one I want to mention, just for specific bills, is House Bill 1387, and this is a bill sponsored by Representative Ramos that created a non-sponsored pool of cadets at the training academy, and it was basically a way to get, number one, create a new cohort at the class, but also provide an avenue for folks who wanted to, I'm going to just kind of put it my way, to sort of buy their own way into the academy and not come in under the sponsorship of an agency. And then that would create a whole class at the academy. And then out of that class, agencies that were less than 75,000 would sort of have, I think, 75% of those members of that class, that cadets of that class that came out. There is a proposed substitute, and I think the proposed substitute that's out there is going to create a work group at the Criminal Justice Training Commission and have that group come back with a recommendation on how a cohort like that, you know, could be put together. I think that's that's at least a good step in the right direction. Again, it's a piece of legislation that we support and thinks that it's one that can be implemented in the confines of the bill. But there are some folks, I think, that have some concerns about it. And I think the prime sponsor has agreed to just have a study on that. And we'll come back next session with something that, you know, is really concrete, that's been worked out and worked through. And for those of you who remember, I'll just throw the Canine Working Group out there, that something that was very successful and something that we think can be replicated at the Training Commission.
Yeah, Michael, I got two comments on this. The first one being, I think the focus should be for this session and in the interim is to work on getting the regional academies up and running. And then, we can focus on creating new cohorts. But I agree with the study group. I'm very grateful that Representative Ramos has decided to study it and make some recommendations. I think that's the right tack, and very grateful for that. But again, I think in the short term, the regional academies. I'll just mention one more thing about the regional academies, and I'll turn it back over to Michael. I've been in a couple of meetings this week. Money has been freed up. It sounds like that the Pasco Regional Academy will go online May 1st. Michael and I were asked to help out with that endeavor, getting that money freed up. Michael did a very good job of getting that done and doing what we had to do. That being said, the next regional academy, and I heard this from Director Alexander herself, will be Skagit Valley Community College, and her goal is to get that one up and running by the end of the year. So that's 2 more regional academies. Where we go from there, we'll do, the success of those 2 regional academy rollouts will determine where we go from there. So Ken, I assume that's you on there. The actual start date for Pasco is May 8th, but again, the money it will be freed up beginning May 1st. So thank you, Ken, for the more specific information. But again, it's a total step in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to take a second and walk through sort of some bills that also of our interest to us, with, and some, on the high side and the medium side of bills that, as I note them, I'll let you know what our position is. House Bill 1055, which is a bill that puts the 911 operators or the safety telecommunications folks into the Public Safety Employee Retirement Plan, or PSERS, and takes them out of PERS. It's a piece of legislation that James has testified on at least twice, maybe 3 times. And that bill is up for executive action in the House Appropriations Committee coming up next week. I just want to note this bill. It's nothing that we've taken a position on, but Senate Bill or House Bill 1333 is a bill to establish a domestic violence extremism commission. And the reason I noted that is James and I participated last interim with a group to create a definition. We're involved in a work group with a working group to define extremism at the CJTC. So this is a little bit broader than that. Has a lot of federal agencies involved. It's something I wanted to flag for everybody if that's something that they wanted to follow on their own. But it's, again, it's something for us that we're just going to, strongly monitor, for lack of a better way of putting it. As I mentioned, in the Senate Transportation Committee next week, both the jaywalking bill and the non-moving violation bill are being heard. For those of you who have a corrections interest or you're a corrections officer, House Bill 5270, which limits the DOC's assistance with federal immigration enforcement activities, is scheduled for executive session also next week. Another bill that has been recently introduced that we have not taken a position on yet is Senate Bill 5606. And this is a bill that regards to the short title is Deterring Illegal Racing. And I'm certain everybody knows the increase in those activities around the state, in my backyard, Tacoma in particular. So this is a bill that spends a lot of time talking about how that crime has, become really prevalent in our communities. And it's something that Senator Levick and Senator Conway and Senator Kaiser are very much interested in, because I think It's something that has gone on in their communities and something that, they want to take a proactive act in. And so basically it just makes driftings and illegal racing and cookies, for my words, an enhanced crime. So, and then it just requires, some seizures of vehicles, that's mandatory. So again, really trying to get at the crime of illegal racing and making it, I guess, easier, for lack of a better way of putting it, for law enforcement to address illegal racing in their communities. As I mentioned, it is scheduled for a public hearing coming up next week. And it's something I think, James, that we should think about on our Tuesday meeting of, taking a position on. And my quick read of it would lean into something we ought to support. I'd also note, although I don't know if Marco is on next week, in the House Housing Committee, House Bill 1633, which is the Homes for Heroes program that Marco testified on the House side. And it's a bill sponsored by one of his legislators over in the Tri-Cities. And this is a program that would provide up to, I think, $25,000 for a peace officer to provide for things like closing costs and down payments on homes. So something we greatly support for sure, and something we definitely appreciate being introduced into the legislature is one of those things that will help on recruitment and retention. I mentioned that 5533, the vehicular pursuit working group, is scheduled for a public hearing this coming week in Ways and Means, and something we'll definitely sign up in support of. And then also Senate Bill 1445, as I mentioned, the Patterns and Practices Bill is also up next week in the House Appropriations Committee. And that'll be its last stop, should it pass out of the Appropriations Committee before it hits the Rules Committee and begins to move to the floor. So with that, James, I am going to stop. That's a lot. I appreciate everybody listening and, allowing me to get through everything. And if we want to go back and talk about something in particular based upon the chat and the emails you're getting, I'm happy to do that.
No, I think we keep it short today. We have some other business to attend as FOP. That being said, I want to take time to go around the room, recognize all the board members, lodge presidents that attended. So I'm going to start at the top of my screen. So we have Mark Coleman from Renton. Go ahead.
Just thanks to the committee. I've got a question that I'll take off the meeting, and thank God I'm FOP, and thank you for all your work.
Thanks, Mark. Steve Dills, our secretary, excuse me.
Thanks for all your hard work. I have nothing to add. I appreciate everything.
Now the state treasurer, Jeff Anaya, you got anything for us?
No, I don't. Thank you, guys.
Holt from Spokane.
Nothing today. Thank you.
And then Ken Roski, you got any words of wisdom?
Nope. Appreciate your guys' hard work. Thank you.
And Jim David, one of our laborers.
Thank you, Michael. As usual, you do an excellent job for us.
Appreciate that, Jim.
Okay, I'm going to sign off today. Just remember, we do this every Saturday. Also, I'm going to leave you with these parting words. If you want to know the position that we hold, just check us out. We're open. We're transparent. Don't take somebody else's word for it. You get a hold of us. Also, if you want to be a part of the process, Tuesday morning meeting, contact your lodge president. They have the link. If you can't get a hold of your lodge president, you email me directly or Marco. We will make sure you get the link. Everyone is encouraged to be part of our legislative process. Thank you again for attending this week. And with that, we'll see you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.